We're on to it. So what are we going to look at today in this talk? I'm going to go over what is a denial of service attack, why people will actually go and perform denial of service attacks, what they're going to do and target, how they're going to identify and find these targets, and then finally we're going to finish up with how to protect your systems and a bit about prioritization and ordering the tasks into a plan. So what is a denial of service attack? They fall into, it's when an attacker is going to do some actions that make your system unstable and unavailable to users. It may also not be an attacker, it could be someone at Facebook doing a BGP upgrade and taking the whole company offline. But yeah, that aside, there's two main types. There's volumetric, layer 7 protocol. So volumetric is when they just send so much traffic, everything gets clogged up, nothing can work on the server, the pipes are full, the firewalls run out of CPU. Layer 7 protocol is a little bit more targeted, and this is when you start exploiting weaknesses in the infrastructure or the application. These are quite attractive to attackers because they're going to have a low input with a high impact. So for instance, one request will tie up and stop other requests being made. So if there's a database query that locks everything up and the other users can't use the system, that's that. And this is also quite hard to filter and target, remove, because it's going to look like legitimate traffic, normal users using the system. And it may sort of take the form of, if anyone's had a performance test report, there'll be some slow pages or something that comes up. So the business owner may just say, oh, don't worry about that page, it's used once a quarter. It doesn't matter if it takes an extra 30 seconds, no one's really going to worry about it. But as an attacker, I'll go, yep, that's exactly what I want to hit, and I'm just going to hit that over and over again, and it's going to use up all your CPU, or disk space, or database queries, or something along those lines. It may also take the form of vulnerabilities in the application that crashes it, causes infinite loops. Zip bombs, so this is when you have a large file that zips down really small, and for instance, you could attach that to an email. As the antivirus on the email extracts the file, it uses up all the memory or all the disk space, and then your AV checking on your inbound emails stops working. Similar to that, there's, say, XML being laughed, so this is recursively expanding XML. That XML will expand out to about 3 gigabytes of memory, and it's only about a dozen lines long. So quite small. Sure, most XML libraries will block that these days, still find stuff that will crash. So which ones will attackers use? Layer 7, volumetric? Well, in a large attack, these big coordinated attacks that we've seen in the last few months, last year with NZX, they're going to use a variety of methods, and they're going to find their attack which is going to return the best benefit, best return on investment for their attacker to get the best, well, the worst crash on the target for them. A little bit sort of terminology, denial of service attack, that's the overall overarching class of vulnerabilities. A distributed denial of service attack is a particular subset of denial of service attacks where a large botnet or similar is used to send targets. So it's distributed, the traffic's coming from a distributed network, often a botnet. So why do people want to perform a denial of service attack? It all comes down to motives. Ransomware, the blackmail style, DoS, like we saw, say, with NZX last year, it's a business. They've got some KPIs to achieve. Their shareholders are going to want dividends. It's a company, you know, to the point of they'll have a service desk who will help walk you through buying Bitcoin. They're most probably, and there's some of their service desks are a lot better than normal organizations, because how many service desks could actually walk someone through buying Bitcoin? If it's an issue-motivated group, they might just dislike your organization, so they're going to attack you because they just don't like you. It may also be used for a distraction. If you're doing another attack, you want to exfiltrate some data, plant a backdoor or something, you do a denial of service attack that's really noisy, you get the SOC and the security team focused on that while you're doing some other attack somewhere else in the business. So with the DoS for blackmail and ransomware, there are some similarities. Hey, they're both wanting money for some sort of thing, but there's a little bit of a difference in that for denial of service, it's normally a threat, money for a threat, so give me some money or I'll DoS you, while ransomware is, hey, I've locked all your files, give me money. Though that is starting to change a little bit with ransomware because there's now also money so we don't leak it. And some say the NZX attacks last year lasted for so long was it's been covered in the media, so the group behind it was using it as advertising for their CV to say, hey, we're actually really competent at what we can do. We can have a long-running attack. You really want to pay us when we tell you we're going to DoS you. So how are denial of service attacks performed? So methodology, so for the volumetric attacks, you're most probably going to need a botnet. Quite often compromise a whole bunch of cheap ISP modems, routers of default creds, get them to send a whole lot of traffic. Most of it will be ICMP or UDP. TCP, not so much just because of the handshakes and it establishes a bit more. You'd more use the TCP in your layer 7 attacks. UDP is quite interesting because you can use it for reflective and amplification. So reflective is seeing UDP messages, you could set the source address, so to be your target opposed to you. So in this example, we've got the botnet, it's doing a DNS query, it set the source as actually the target, so when the DNS server responds, it's sending it to the target, not back to the botnet. And there's also amplification going on in that, the DNS request might only be 24 bytes, quite small. The response can be up to 512 bytes, so you're getting a 20 times amplification going on. So, if we've got 1 byte leaving the botnet, you've actually got 20 bytes hitting the target. Dangers of open UDP ports. We had a customer a couple of years back, and they'd left a MS SQL UDP port open to the internet. It was used in a reflective attack, so they were just that middle DNS server, they weren't actually the target of their attack. And they received a multi-$1,000 Azure bill just over the weekend. And they were just the relay, they weren't actually the target in this case. So how do you go about making botnets? Well, on the internet, there's a bunch of old stuff which isn't patched, stuff that should just really not be on the internet. People just leave things with the default creds on the front page so you can log in, own them. Some people put things on the internet with no passwords. And if that's all too much, there's stress testing and as a service, so you can just use your DoS as a service. It's 2021, everything's as a service, right? So layer 7 denial of service attacks. Firstly, you're going to need to find a vulnerability in the application or the network to exploit. So there's a bit more research and reconnaissance that needs to go into this. You still mostly will use a bit of a botnet, but you'll need a lot less hosts because you're targeting a particular piece in the application or the target. For an example, we had a customer who said, oh yeah, we've paid for DoS mitigations, we'd like you to test it. Found out that all these DoS preventions were sort of for volumetric attacks, so we spun up an EC2 instance for about 12 cents an hour, and the server went down with sort of a low number, hundreds or a low thousands of requests per second, nothing too much. So what's an attacker going to go after in an organization? So we had the motives before, and these will tie into the goals. So the blackmail, they're going to find something that's going to disrupt business operations. So you're going to pay it because you need to get your business going again. If it's public relations, they want something that's publicly facing, so it's going to get some media coverage. So they can attach their message about how bad your company is to that media coverage. And if it's distraction, they most probably want to do a little bit everywhere. So attacker's mindset. If it's a brochure or a website, why bother? Business is just going to continue the website, it's not actually doing something. So you want to find targets that are going to affect the business in some ways and people are going to notice it. So a lot of people say, hey, you got to it's just the websites you need to worry about. We'll put a CDN in front of it or a WAF, you're all good. But so, CDNs, content distribution networks, will have some scrubbing, some DoS scrubbing, they'll have some WAF in there, they might throttle stuff, they'll do some caching to try and stop all the requests going back to the origin server, which is the actual server that's running the database in the application. So as an attacker, we want to find a way to get around that CDN and go directly to the origin server, because if we can hit that directly, chances are we can knock that offline. So, this can be quite easy to find. For example, some companies will go, CDNs cost a lot of money, so we'll just put production on a CDN. Test, doesn't matter, we'll just have that people directly hook into the server. So, hey, we'll find the test URL, not behind a CDN. What are the chances are that the prod server and the test server are behind the same firewall? Yeah, that's fairly, pretty common. Same host, that's unfortunately also far too common. Same database, about the same. If it's on the same host, it's going to be on the same database. So we can attack the test server and we actually will take production off at the same time. So we had those screenshots before. That ZX Security has a tool internally which we call Flaming Ping, which is similar to Shodan or Medal, Slowhand, Kiwi Fruit, and that's scanning New Zealand's IP address space to identify what's there, doing port scans, the screenshots which you saw before. And it'll be fair to assume an attacker is going to do something similar to find all your other infrastructure that isn't just your website. So for instance, we can identify branch sites and retail sites through this tool. So we'll find people who will put their tank status directly on the internet. Sometimes if you need to know exactly how much fuel you've got in all your fuel tanks at your truck stop. If you're a supermarket, you'll need to know whether your fridges are working or not. And if you're a little pizza store, you'll need to put your point of sale system directly on the internet, including the page that appeared to allow you to edit all the prices. So these are retail sites. So as an attacker, like, I found a retail site. I'm thinking chances are this is going to be on a UFB or cell connection. Chances are these aren't going to have DoS scrubbing or monitoring by the ISP because they're just sort of normal residential style connections. But what are the chances are that the point of sale and FPOS machine is using the same internet connection? So if I take that down, I'm also going to take down the point of sale. What's going to happen if the business can't do FPOS for a day, an hour? And can an attacker easily identify these? Well, look at those screenshots. Yeah, fairly easily. Remote access. Similar to this, people, instead of just using the generic VPN pages or webmail pages, they're going to brand it with the fact it's SCADA and with their council name. So I'm going to see that and go, that's going to be good because that's most probably quite important, a SCADA network for a council. Or you're just going to put your webmail in there, brand it up with your logo and your name. Knock this off. What happens if all your users and your staff can't do their email for a day? So this is going to disrupt people working from home. It's going to make remote support difficult. If the support people can't log into the systems, they're going to have to come on site to fix it and plug in directly to the network. And also consider the same things that traverse the same firewall. If I take down your VPN server, what's using the same firewall, the same internet connection? Because if I attack that, it's mostly going to take down everything else behind that. And so another way an attacker can go about identifying systems is certificate transparency. So every time an HTTPS certificate is issued, it gets added to the certificate transparency log. We can go through that, we can chuck all those into DNS, see which ones resolve to hosts and IP addresses we can target. And this is particularly interesting if those IP addresses are not behind some sort of CDN or allows us to find that origin server. So quick example for Google, there's websites, you can type in Google, it will show you all the certificates for Google and anything under it that's a certificate issued, so we can use all that. So going back to the sort of performance test reports where we had that slow page that no one really cared about, hey, we could just spider the site and find these slow pages. So even if they're using a CDN, chances are if the page is really slow, it would indicate that the request is going back to the origin server and even though you're going through the CDN, you've actually got a CDN bypass because that page or report or something can't be cached. So you're hitting the origin server, you're hitting the database. And spidering websites, some of the times, if they're not using the CDN, it can go down. Just using a laptop this week, burp and 25 threads in this case this week, site went down, stop burp, site went back up again. So Some sites aren't particularly robust if they're not behind a CDN and something else like that. So email headers. So systems will send out emails for new accounts or password resets. If you trawl through the email headers, you'll quite often find the actual the IP addresses of the infrastructure, like the web application server, or maybe their internal email relay, which you could target. And again, take the system down. What happens if your site can't take new registrations because it can't send out emails? What's going to be the business impact to that? Historical DNS. Pretty much every CDN will say, when you move to a CDN, once you've done that and moved across, make sure you change the IP address of your origin server so people can't, say, find it in historical DNS. So what historical DNS is some people are capturing DNS over a long time, so you can go back and see what the hosts were previously. Chances are the IP address just before it moved to a CDN is going to be the origin server still. And regulatory requirements. We had NZX last year as an example of this. It was their website that was attacked. They said throughout that their trading platform was fine, their trading platform never actually was attacked, never went down, but they still had to halt the market because they had a regulatory requirement that particular documents needed to be available to market participants. These were hosted on the website, so when the website went down, they had to turn off the market. Similar to that, collateral damage. What happens if someone targets another customer of your ISP or a service provider which gives you, say, your email or something? What happens to your business then? Can you be collateral damage? Have you isolated and got guaranteed pipes that your systems won't get taken down if another customer of one of your vendors is attacked? So part you're most interested in is how can we go about protecting your systems? First thing you've got to do is, what systems do you have? If you've got shadow IT, chances are an attacker doing some good reconnaissance is most probably got a better indication of what all your external facing infrastructure is than you do as the IT team. And you can't defend what you don't know about. And even if the system isn't something you don't know about, it might cause issues to other systems, it might affect particular parts of the business, or it could just cause reputational damage. So I'll go through a little bit of a scenario now. We've got a little organization, got a web server, an email server, DNS server, firewall. Web content, we just use the CDN, right? CDN in front of the web server, maybe not so much. You've got to think, is your content actually cacheable? How are you handling the dynamic sessions and the user sessions? Because they need to go back to the database to validate the logon or the app server needs to generate the dynamic content. And have you configured the right boxes on your origin server in the CDN? Does your origin server only allow requests from the CDN, or can anyone still make a request to it? Who can purge and expire documents that are cached in the CDN? So, for example, with a customer, we could do a request, it was in the cache, about 0.3 of a second, that was fine. Though from a random IP address, we could send a purge request to the CDN. That was successful. Next request takes almost 4 times as long. Because it's not cached, got to go back to the origin server, subsequent requests are fine. So what we can do here is, as an attacker, I just need to issue purge requests to the CDN, and then it's actually the legitimate traffic and the legitimate users going to the site that are actually going to cause the load of the origin server. So the origin server's logs will show that their normal user base is actually causing the denial of service attack, again, not their attacker who's just sending purges which only go as far as the edge of the CDN. Making sure you protect your origin servers so people can't find them. Can they find the IP addresses in DNS history? Have you used domain names you can find certificate transparency log, like originserver.dob.example.com? And can you still send traffic to these IP addresses? So even if the firewall's doing a deny, it's still going to consume some CPU resource to actually do that deny. So hopefully the firewall can stop that. So things are still vulnerable, and when it does go crash, your CDN's going to be really good at throwing you under the bus, and they're really good at saying that the CDN's fine, it's the website that's down. So you do need to make sure, even though you've got a CDN, you're still protecting your web server. You still need to think about that. It's not a one-trick pony. DNS domain registrations. A lot of mitigations are going to require DNS updates to move your critical systems. So it's really good if your DNS is scalable to DoS attacks. So you can use a provider to do this. Make sure if you're a New Zealand company, they've also got a point of presence in New Zealand. So it's nice and fast for your New Zealand users and allows changes quickly, subject to the DNS time to live. So hopefully if you're under attack, you haven't set all your DNS to be 48 hours or 5 days, because that's going to be a long time before you can actually implement any changes. And while you're doing this, make sure you think about consolidating your DNS and your domain registrations in one place. Know who has access to it. Make sure you're using like a shared mail inbox rather than someone who signed up for it 5 years ago has now left the company, so your company loses the domain because you never got the renew your domain email because it went to a former employee. Now, other infrastructure, make sure your BGP updates are appropriately restricted. Also, make sure they've got a failback state, which will happen automatically, so maybe you don't end up with such a Facebook example for that. Mail, hey, it's 2021. Just use a cloud provider for email. It's email for communications is generally still really important for most businesses. So make sure you've just do it in the cloud. Rolling your own is pretty much over. So move that out of the organization. So once we've defended what we've got already, when you bring on new applications, new network architectures, make sure you're actually thinking about how you're going to prevent DoS attacks, and making sure if you've got particular tools and scrubbing and caching and CDNs, making sure you're designing your application to make the best use of the protections in front. For example, anything that's not cacheable should be behind some sort of logon or CAPTCHA or rate limiting. That's enforced at the edge of the CDN, not back at the application server, because if it's back at the application server, it's still vulnerable. And if you're implementing a sort of a multi-tier architecture, make sure you don't end up with sort of layer 7 bottlenecks. So we had a customer who they've gone, so we want to be able to scale this application, so we'll put a whole bunch of sort of front-end web servers. Those will horizontally scale and scale up as there's more load, and scale down when there's not so much load. Same with the databases, but we've got this big old legacy Java application. It handles the session management and all the state inside. We can't really, and it's a vendor code, and the vendor's not going to change anything, so we can't make it horizontally scale. So, a few users, that's fine. Whole bunch of users. The horizontal scaling is just going to fire more requests at this monolithic code in the middle faster and make it crash. So your preventions have actually just made it crash faster. So for layer 7, make sure when you're implementing these new things, get a performance test report done of all the web app side or the infrastructure. Make sure you understand what the bottlenecks are, and don't just put them down to, no one uses it, that will be fine. Make sure you actually put in protections in place. So remember that a WAF isn't going to solve layer 7 problems, because these are going to look like legitimate uses of the site. To the point of who would think 404 pages should be fine, right? Well, that 12 cents an hour we took a server down mentioned before? That was because we were generating random URLs, and which resulted in 404. The CDNs were really good at caching pages which had been requested before, but we're sending in random URLs that haven't been seen before, resulting in 404 pages. And depending on the content management system, 404 pages can be quite expensive to check for, because it might check the pages table, it might then check the redirections table, it might check the people table, it might go and check the tags table. So it's doing like 5, 6, a dozen database lookups before it can actually return the 404. So you've got to find a way of telling your CDN, these are all the valid URLs. If it's anything else from the edge, can you please serve a 404? Don't don't come back to the server to do that. Another thing, just make sure your patches are installed. These are going to stop exploitations of bugs in the applications of the device, which may slow things down or crash it. And sort of had those branch sites before, we could geofence it to New Zealand IP addresses, or even better still, just site-to-site VPN, so you're not actually exposing your retail sites to the internet. It's only over a VPN from head office that it can be accessed. So making sure we protect everything and all the branch sites as well. Make sure we monitor all the things. And monitoring, you need to start now, so you know what normal looks like. Because if you go, one of your competitors is being attacked, and you look at your logs all the first time, you go, oh, we're under attack as well, what do we do? Panic, 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 and then an hour or 2 or 3 down the track, you realize, oh, this is normal, and we're not actually under attack, but everyone's scared, everyone's working on it, and doesn't result in a good day. So make sure you know what normal looks like ahead of time. And when you're monitoring these things, make sure you do it from outside the organization, because another monitoring server on the same switch beside your web server and your database server, it's always going to be fine, because chances are their attack might be further upstream. So making sure you're doing monitoring, yes, internally, but also externally, following the code path, the network path that your users would be using. Make sure you also monitor disk space. Where the customer, we were just doing a routine port scan against them. Their firewall was logging all the deny requests. The disk on the firewall filled up, and when the disk on the firewall filled up, the firewall went into a state where it said, I'm blocking everything, even stuff I should allow, and I'll wait for someone to plug in and clear up disk space. Client complained, we just logged a high-risk finding. Then you want to make sure you're doing some tests and some simulations, so you know, does the end-to-end systems work how you expect them to work for the DoS preventions? And does your service provider have the correct phone numbers? We were doing a test for a customer, and we're testing their DoS preventions. Found out that their ISP, who was doing the monitoring, the DoS scrubbing, had their 4-year-old service desk. Since then, they'd changed service desk, but somewhere along the way, that phone number had never got updated, so they're ringing up the wrong people. So hopefully, from today, you've started to think about what systems could cripple your business. Maybe starting to think about some other systems other than your website that you need to do some DoS prevention for. Hopefully you've got some ideas about how you can identify and find these threats, maybe start to get a little bit of a plan to defend them. Chances are you may be a little bit overwhelmed about all these things you think about. So you need to do things in a sensible order. So on the ZX Security website, we've got a blog post about a DoS preparation model, which steps it through. This is a screenshot, but the blog goes on a lot longer. Have a read through it. But it roughly distills down to, first step is you want to figure out what you have and what you need to defend, and the attacker's going to attack. Then you put in a place for how do you defend your assets. You put those defenses in place, and then sort of at level 5, you start monitoring and doing the simulations. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for the Christchurch Con crew for accepting my talk. Cheers to the ZX team and the other people I've bounced ideas off for this talk. Thank you all very much.